We have Venezuela acting up. They continue to send people that we rebuff to our border. They continue to send drugs into our country. Venezuela, they've been very nasty, and we can't let that happen.
Not long after this interview, Donald Trump put muscle behind those words and deployed Navy destroyers and thousands of Marines toward Venezuela. Fast forward to today, and over 500 members and associates of Maduro's cartel are behind bars. In this video, I'll reveal how the U.S. pulled it off, what these arrests really mean, and why many believe Maduro's cartel is edging dangerously close to a military showdown with the United States. The cartel empire crumbles. The world watched in shock as headlines blazed across international media in August 2025. The United States had launched its most devastating blow yet against what officials call one of the most dangerous criminal enterprises on Earth. But this wasn't your typical drug bust. This was the systematic dismantling of what American authorities claim is a narco-terrorist organization masquerading as a government. Venezuela's alleged Cartel of the Suns under Nicolas Maduro. The operation's scope was breathtaking. While social media buzzed with claims of over 500 captured cartel members, the reality proved more complex yet equally dramatic. The United States had indeed arrested over 2,700 members and associates of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang allegedly supported by Maduro's regime, since early 2025. The people in custody are said to be
Tren de Aragua leaders, members, and associates. The charges include firearms trafficking, drug trafficking, and a barbaric murder-for-hire plot in which several of the defendants agreed to kill 2 people.
The crown jewel of this campaign wasn't mass arrests alone. It was the financial evisceration of the cartel's leadership and the unprecedented military pressure being applied to Venezuela itself. Attorney General Pam Bondi stood before cameras in August 2025, her words carrying the weight of years of investigation. She said, "Maduro is one of the world's leading narco-traffickers, working with cartels to flood the U.S. with fentanyl-laced cocaine." The statement wasn't hyperbole. It was the culmination of a legal and financial siege that had seized over $700 million in assets directly linked to Maduro himself. Private jets worth millions, mansions in the Dominican Republic and Florida, exotic car collections, horse farms, and jewelry, all frozen or confiscated as the fruits of what American prosecutors describe as the largest state-sponsored drug trafficking operation in the Western Hemisphere. The genesis of this criminal empire, according to U.S. intelligence, traces back to the late 1990s under Hugo Chávez's revolutionary government. The Cartel of the Suns, named after the sun insignias on Venezuelan military uniforms, allegedly began as border corruption but evolved into something far more sinister. By the time Maduro inherited power in 2013, American authorities claim he had transformed Venezuela into what they call a narco-state, where government institutions allegedly protect drug trafficking operations worth billions of dollars annually. The cartel's alleged structure reads like a blueprint for institutional corruption. High-ranking Venezuelan military officials, intelligence chiefs, legislators, and even Supreme Court justices stand accused of creating a coordinated network that facilitates the trafficking of hundreds of tons of cocaine annually. The operation's sophistication allegedly extends far beyond simple border bribes. U.S. prosecutors paint a picture of military-grade logistics, radar systems disabled for drug flights, naval vessels providing escort for trafficking boats, and airport codes provided to smugglers to mimic legitimate commercial flights. But perhaps most damning are the alleged international alliances that transformed a regional trafficking network into a global threat. American indictments detail partnerships with Colombia's FARC guerrillas, providing them with weapons and safe haven in exchange for cocaine. The relationship allegedly goes beyond business. Prosecutors claim Maduro's cartel armed FARC with machine guns and rocket launchers, directly supporting terrorism while profiting from the chaos. The Mexican connection proved equally explosive. Links to the notorious Sinaloa cartel allegedly created a pipeline that floods American streets with not just cocaine, but the deadly fentanyl that kills over 100,000 Americans annually. Through these alliances, Venezuela allegedly became the nexus of a transcontinental drug empire that American officials describe as an existential threat to national security. Yet the cartel's tentacles extend far beyond traditional drug trafficking. The emergence of Tren de Aragua, a Venezuelan gang that is spread across Latin America and into the United States, represents what prosecutors call the cartel's enforcement arm. This organization, which allegedly operates under the protection of Maduro's government, has been linked to human trafficking, extortion, murder, and the kind of territorial control typically associated with Mexican cartels. When American authorities announced they had identified over 100 confirmed Tren de Aragua members among migrants, with 500 more as persons of interest, it became clear that the cartel's influence had metastasized far beyond Venezuela's borders. The financial empire supporting this criminal network staggers the imagination. Beyond the $700 million in seized Maduro-linked assets, investigators have traced over $450 million seized from the cartel's associates since 2017. The money laundering operation allegedly involves everything from cryptocurrency manipulation to real estate empires spanning multiple countries. Venezuelan businessman Samark Lopez Bello, sanctioned for his ties to the regime, controlled companies valued at $511 million across multiple countries, all allegedly built on drug profits and corruption. The cartel's alleged crimes extend far beyond financial corruption into the realm of systematic violence and human rights abuses. UN investigations document over 245 extrajudicial killings and widespread torture under Maduro's regime, with security forces often overlapping with cartel operations. The post-2024 election crackdown saw at least 25 killings and over 2,000 arbitrary detentions, as the regime allegedly used both state security forces and criminal proxies to suppress opposition. But the Venezuelan government vehemently rejects these characterizations. Foreign Minister Ivan Gil has dismissed the bounty on Maduro as pathetic and political propaganda, accusing the United States of fabricating evidence to justify intervention. Venezuelan officials argue that their anti-drug efforts have captured over 100 Colombian drug lords since the 2000s, and that U.S. sanctions exacerbate poverty without curbing trafficking. They frame the entire narrative as an imperialist fabrication designed to justify regime change. This defense finds some support among independent analysts. Insight Crime, a respected criminal investigation organization, argues that U.S. sanctions mischaracterize the Cartel of the Suns as a hierarchical entity, suggesting it's more accurately described as decentralized networks of corruption rather than a unified criminal organization. They note that evidence of direct trafficking by top figures like Maduro remains circumstantial, emphasizing instead a role in granting criminal concessions and protection. The controversy deepens when examining the geopolitical context. These allegations emerge amid Venezuela's worst political crisis in decades, following Maduro's disputed 2024 election victory that was widely rejected as rigged. The U.S., along with the UK and EU, has imposed sanctions and refused recognition, effectively treating Maduro as an illegitimate president. This context raises questions about whether drug trafficking allegations serve broader political objectives beyond law enforcement. Yet the scope and consistency of American legal action suggests something far more substantial than political theater. The 2020 indictments of Maduro and 14 other Venezuelan officials on narco-terrorism charges represent years of investigation involving multiple intelligence agencies and law enforcement bodies. The charges include conspiracy to import cocaine, narco-terrorism, and possession of destructive devices, crimes carrying sentences from 20 years to life imprisonment. The human cost of this alleged criminal empire extends far beyond Venezuela's borders. American communities ravaged by the opioid crisis see Venezuelan-linked drugs flooding their streets. The seizure of 30 tons of cocaine linked to Maduro and his associates represents just a fraction of what prosecutors claim is a systematic effort to weaponize drug addiction against American society. Attorney General Bondi's characterization of the operation as organized crime, no different than the mafia, reflects the administration's view that this transcends traditional drug trafficking into the realm of state-sponsored terrorism. The Venezuelan people themselves remain caught in the crossfire of this alleged criminal enterprise. Over 7 million Venezuelans have fled their country amid economic collapse, political repression, and violence. Whether this exodus results from cartel-related corruption, international sanctions, or broader governance failures remains hotly debated, but the human suffering is undeniable, creating a refugee crisis that has destabilized the entire region. As 2025 progressed, the United States shifted from patient investigation to aggressive action. The transformation of rhetoric alone tells the story. Where previous administrations spoke of sanctions and diplomatic pressure, the Trump administration began describing Maduro's government as a narco-terror cartel rather than a legitimate state. This rhetorical shift laid the groundwork for the unprecedented escalation that would define the remainder of the year. The stage was set for confrontation. On one side, a Venezuelan government that claims legitimacy through elections while denying any involvement in drug trafficking. On the other, an American administration convinced it faces not just a criminal organization, but a terrorist state that has weaponized narcotics against U.S. citizens. The collision between these worldviews would soon escalate beyond legal proceedings into the realm of military action, forever changing the dynamics of U.S.-Venezuela relations and potentially reshaping the entire war on drugs, the generals, and their crimes. Deep within the marble halls of the U.S. Department of Justice, investigators had spent years piecing together what they describe as one of the most sophisticated criminal enterprises in modern history. The faces staring back from their files weren't typical cartel kingpins. They were presidents, vice presidents, defense ministers, and Supreme Court justices. The 2020 indictments revealed a rogues gallery of Venezuelan power brokers, each allegedly playing a crucial role in what prosecutors call a state capture operation that transformed an entire nation into a criminal enterprise. At the apex of this alleged pyramid sits Nicolas Maduro Moros, the man American authorities now describe not as Venezuela's president, but as the fugitive head of a narco-terror cartel with a bounty on his head.
Today, the Department of Justice and State Department are announcing a historic $50 million reward for information leading to the arrest of Nicolas Maduro.
The transformation of Maduro from bus driver to president to alleged cartel leader reads like a Latin American political thriller, except the consequences are devastatingly real. Born into working-class circumstances in Caracas, Maduro's rise through Venezuela's political ranks seemed unremarkable until American investigators began connecting the dots. Prosecutors allege that since at least 1999, Maduro has led the Cartel of the Suns in corrupting Venezuela's military, intelligence, legislature, and judiciary to facilitate the trafficking of tons of cocaine into the United States. The charges paint a picture of a leader who allegedly uses cocaine as a weapon against America, flooding U.S. streets with drugs while enriching himself and his cronies. The evidence American prosecutors present reads like an indictment of institutional corruption. They claim Maduro personally negotiated multi-ton cocaine shipments with FARC leaders, provided military-grade weapons, including machine guns and rocket launchers, to terrorist organizations, and used the proceeds to fund armed militias that suppress Venezuelan opposition. UN investigations link his administration to over 245 extrajudicial killings and systematic torture, creating what human rights organizations describe as crimes against humanity. Standing alongside Maduro in the alleged criminal hierarchy is Diosdado Cabello Rondon, a figure many consider the true power behind the Venezuelan throne. This former paratrooper who participated in Chavez's 1992 coup attempt has evolved into what American authorities describe as a cartel manager with a $25 million bounty on his head. Cabello's alleged role extends beyond mere drug trafficking into the realm of systematic repression, overseeing security forces accused of torture, sexual violence, and political persecution. But perhaps the most compelling case in the government's arsenal involves Hugo Armando Carvajal Barrios, known as El Pollo, the former Venezuelan spy master who pleaded guilty to U.S. drug charges in June 2025. His cooperation represents a potential goldmine of intelligence about the cartel's inner workings. Carvajal's journey from Maduro's intelligence chief to cooperating witness illustrates the fractures beginning to appear within the alleged criminal network. Carvajal's guilty plea to narco-terrorism, cocaine importation, and weapons charges provides prosecutors with insider testimony about the cartel's operations. His allegations include providing weapons and protection to FARC, enabling guerrilla violence that has claimed thousands of lives across Colombia and Venezuela. The intelligence windfall from his cooperation could prove devastating to remaining cartel members still at large. The military dimension of the alleged cartel operation centers around Vladimir Padrino Lopez, Venezuela's longtime defense minister, who faces a $15 million bounty for his alleged role in facilitating cocaine flights. American prosecutors claim Padrino charged fees for safe passage of drug flights while simultaneously ordering the shoot-down of rival trafficking aircraft. His dual role as defender of Venezuelan sovereignty and alleged protector of criminal networks epitomizes the state criminal nexus that defines the cartel. Under Padrino's command, Venezuelan forces are accused of over 1,000 extrajudicial killings between 2021 to 2023, often targeting civilians in marginalized communities under the guise of anti-crime operations. The systematic nature of these killings, combined with torture and sexual violence in detention facilities, has led international observers to classify them as crimes against humanity. The cartel's alleged judicial corruption reaches reaches the highest levels of Venezuelan jurisprudence through Michael José Moreno Perez, the Chief Justice of Venezuela's Supreme Court, who faces money laundering charges for allegedly accepting millions in bribes. Prosecutors claim Moreno used his judicial position to fix cases for the cartel, including a $100 million General Motors plant seizure, while laundering the proceeds through South Florida real estate investments. This corruption of justice itself represents perhaps the cartel's most insidious achievement, transforming the very institutions meant to combat crime into instruments of criminal protection. The systematic nature of judicial complicity, including issuing retrospective warrants and ignoring torture complaints, has created what human rights organizations describe as total impunity for cartel-linked officials. The technological sophistication of the alleged money laundering operation emerges through figures like Joselit de la Trinidad Ramirez Camacho, Venezuela's former cryptocurrency superintendent, who faces charges for laundering drug proceeds through digital currencies. His arrest in Venezuela in April 2024 on unrelated corruption charges suggests internal regime purges, possibly aimed at eliminating witnesses or consolidating control over criminal proceeds. The international dimensions of the alleged cartel become clear through the case of Tarek Zaidan El Aissami Mada, the former vice president and oil minister whose disappearance from public view following his April 2024 arrest for embezzling up to $21 billion has fueled speculation about internal power struggles. American prosecutors link El Aissami to Hezbollah and drug trafficking networks, suggesting the cartel's reach extends into international terrorism financing. Perhaps no case illustrates the cartel's family connections better than the Narco Sobrinos affair involving Maduro's nephews. Efrain Antonio Campo Flores and Francisco Flores de Freitas were convicted in 2017 for conspiring to import 800 kilograms of cocaine into the United States, each receiving 18-year prison sentences. Their release in a 2022 prisoner swap highlighted the cartel's alleged family ties while demonstrating American willingness to use captured members as diplomatic leverage. The pattern of arrests and prosecutions reveals a calculated American strategy to dismantle the cartel's leadership structure. Cliver Antonio Alcala Cordones, the former Venezuelan general sentenced to over 21 years for providing material support to FARC, represents another crack in the cartel's armor. His 2020 surrender in Colombia and subsequent cooperation have provided prosecutors with additional intelligence about weapons trafficking and terrorist support. The systematic nature of the alleged crimes extends beyond drug trafficking into what prosecutors describe as narco-terrorism. The indictments detail provision of machine guns, rocket launchers, and other military equipment to FARC, enabling guerrilla attacks that have claimed thousands of civilian lives. This transformation of drug trafficking into weapons of war represents what American officials describe as an assault on regional stability itself. The cartel's alleged control over Venezuelan institutions creates what prosecutors describe as a narco-state, where criminal and governmental functions become indistinguishable. Nestor Luis Reverol Torres, Venezuela's interior minister, faces charges for allegedly tipping off traffickers to law enforcement raids, while simultaneously overseeing police forces accused of systematic human rights abuses. The violence associated with cartel operations extends far beyond trafficking disputes into systematic state terror. Post-2024 election crackdowns involved over 2,000 arbitrary detentions, with victims reporting torture including electric shocks, beatings, and sexual violence. Children were not spared. Amnesty International documented 129 minors subjected to torture, forced to record self-incriminating videos under duress. The international implications of these alleged crimes have transformed regional security dynamics. The expansion of Tren de Aragua across Latin America and into the United States represents what prosecutors describe as the cartel's enforcement arm, exporting Venezuelan criminal methods to international markets. This transnational expansion has prompted law enforcement responses across multiple countries, from Colombia to the United States. Yet the Venezuelan government continues to vehemently deny these characterizations. Officials dismiss the charges as fabricated evidence designed to justify international intervention, pointing to their cooperation in past drug seizures and anti-trafficking operations. Foreign Minister Ivan Gil has characterized American accusations as evidence of U.S. policy failures, arguing that sanctions exacerbate the very problems they claim to address. Some independent analysts support aspects of Venezuelan denials. Insight Crimes Assessment suggests the cartel may be less hierarchical than U.S. authorities claim, describing it instead as opportunistic networks of corruption that exploit state weakness rather than representing unified criminal command structure. This analysis suggests that while corruption certainly exists, the cartel label may oversimplify complex relationships between crime and governance. The human cost of this alleged criminal enterprise extends far beyond immediate victims to encompass entire Venezuelan society. Over 7 million Venezuelans Venezuelans have fled their country, creating the largest refugee crisis in the Western Hemisphere. Whether this exodus results from cartel-related corruption, international sanctions, economic mismanagement, or political repression remains debated, but the scale of human suffering is undeniable. The cartel members who remain at large continue to hold positions of power within Venezuelan government, creating what prosecutors describe as ongoing criminal enterprise. Their continued control over military, intelligence, and judicial institutions enables what human rights organizations classify as systematic crimes against humanity while protecting drug trafficking operations worth billions of dollars annually. Successful arrests have required years of international cooperation. Carvajal's extradition from Spain showed U.S. reach, while regional partnerships enabled cross-border operations. Still, most indicted officials remain untouchable, shielded by Venezuelan sovereignty and allies like Russia and China. By 2025, American pressure escalated. Bounties doubled, the cartel was labeled a terrorist organization, and military assets moved near Venezuelan waters. What began as law enforcement now edged into national security, raising the risk of direct confrontation. The stories behind these figures, Maduro's rise from bus driver to accused narco-terrorist, Carvajal's shift from loyalist to witness, reflect the tangled mix of power, corruption, and crime that defines Venezuela and America's evolving war on drugs. Naval blockade, and the final showdown. The morning of August 20th, 2025 marked a watershed moment in U.S.-Venezuela relations as 3 American warships cut through the azure waters of the Caribbean Sea, their destination sending shockwaves through diplomatic channels worldwide. The USS Gravely, USS Jason Dunham, and USS Sampson advanced Aegis guided missile destroyers capable of launching Tomahawk missiles and conducting sophisticated anti-submarine warfare were joined by additional naval assets in what officials described as the largest counter-narcotics deployment in recent memory. But this was no ordinary drug interdiction operation. Carrying over 4,500 personnel, including 2,200 Marines, the fleet represented a show of force unprecedented in the modern war on drugs. The amphibious assault capabilities, nuclear-powered submarines, and strike-capable destroyers suggested preparation for scenarios far beyond maritime drug seizures. As one Pentagon source noted, the deployment reflected President Trump's directive to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into the United States. The Venezuelan response was swift and defiant. Within hours of the American naval deployment announcement, Nicolas Maduro appeared on state television announcing the mobilization of 4.5 million militia members, a force established under Hugo Chavez to counter external threats. "We defend our seas, our skies, and our lands," Maduro declared, his words carrying the weight of a nation preparing for siege. No empire will touch the sacred soil of Venezuela. The military escalation represented the culmination of a carefully orchestrated campaign that had been building throughout 2025. The Treasury Department's designation of the Cartel of the Suns as a specially designated global terrorist organization in July had already crossed a significant threshold, enabling military tools traditionally reserved for international terrorism. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent's statement that the action would execute President Trump's pledge to put America first by cracking down on violent organizations signaled a fundamental shift in how the United States would approach Venezuelan-linked drug trafficking. The legal foundation for this escalation had been methodically constructed over years of investigation and litigation. The 2020 indictments of Maduro and 14 Venezuelan officials for narco-terrorism established the predicate for treating Venezuela not as a sovereign state, but as a criminal organization. The doubling of Maduro's bounty to $50 million in August 2025 reflected what officials described as escalating threats to American national security. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt's declaration that President Trump has been very clear. He's prepared to use every element of American power to stop drugs from flooding into our country left little doubt about the administration's willingness to escalate beyond traditional law enforcement measures. The deployment represented a return to the Monroe Doctrine's assertive approach to hemispheric security, with modern implications that would have been unimaginable to 19th century policymakers. The technical capabilities of the deployed American forces painted a picture of overwhelming military superiority. The Aegis combat system aboard the destroyers provides advanced radar tracking capable of simultaneously monitoring hundreds of targets, while Tomahawk cruise missiles offer precision strike capabilities against land-based targets. The inclusion of nuclear-powered attack submarines added a stealth dimension, capable of covert surveillance and potential special operations support. More ominously, the amphibious squadron carrying 2,200 Marines suggested preparation for potential ground operations. The USS San Antonio, USS Iwo Jima, and USS Fort Lauderdale provide helicopter support, vehicle landing capabilities, and the kind of force projection typically associated with regime change operations rather than drug interdiction. Pentagon sources confirmed that U.S. Special Operations Command North had redirected about half of its 300 personnel to anti-cartel planning, preparing for potential raids by mid-September 2025. Venezuela's defensive preparations revealed the seriousness with which Maduro's government viewed the American threat. The deployment of 15,000 well-armed and trained troops to the Colombia border states of Zulia and Táchira, supplemented by boats, aircraft, and enhanced surveillance systems, suggested preparation for multi-front warfare. The temporary ban on civilian drone operations, citing fears of assassination attempts, reflected the regime's paranoia about American capabilities. The international community watched these developments with growing alarm. China condemned the military buildup as foreign interference in regional affairs, while Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum firmly rejected any U.S. military presence in Mexico, emphasizing that we will never put our sovereignty at risk. We collaborate, but we never subordinate ourselves. The regional implications of American military action extended far beyond Venezuela, threatening to destabilize the entire Caribbean basin. European allies found themselves caught between supporting American anti-drug efforts and opposing what many viewed as dangerous escalation. France provided support for the naval operation, while other EU members expressed concerns about the precedent of treating sovereign governments as criminal organizations. The diplomatic division reflected broader uncertainties about the appropriate response to state-sponsored crime in an interconnected world. The humanitarian implications of potential military action loomed large over the escalating crisis. Venezuela's existing refugee crisis had already displaced over 7 million people, creating the largest displacement in Western Hemisphere history. Military conflict threatened to exacerbate this humanitarian catastrophe while destabilizing neighboring countries, struggling to accommodate Venezuelan migrants. Colombian President Gustavo Petro found himself in a particularly difficult position, managing 15,000 Venezuelan troops massing on his border while maintaining diplomatic relations with both Venezuela and the United States. His government's calls for dialogue reflected regional fears that military escalation could spiral beyond anyone's control. The economic implications of the confrontation extended far beyond immediate military costs. Venezuela's vast oil reserves, the world's largest proven reserves at over 300 billion barrels, added a resource dimension to the conflict that critics argued revealed the true American motivations. Social media discussions reflected these suspicions, with users debating whether the deployment represented genuine anti-drug efforts or a disguised attempt to control Venezuelan energy resources. The timing of the escalation, coming amid Venezuela's post-election political crisis, further complicated international perceptions of American motives. Maduro's disputed 2024 election victory, widely rejected as fraudulent, provided additional justification for American officials who argued they were confronting an illegitimate criminal regime rather than a sovereign government. The role of intelligence cooperation in enabling the escalation became apparent through revelations about information provided by figures like Ovidio Guzman, son of El Chapo. The role of intelligence cooperation in enabling the escalation became apparent through revelations about information provided by figures like captured cartel members. The cooperation of Hugo Carvajal, who pleaded guilty to U.S. drug charges in June 2025, likely provided crucial intelligence about cartel operations and weaknesses. Such insider information proved invaluable in targeting not just individuals, but entire operational networks. The technological dimension of the confrontation revealed the sophisticated capabilities both sides brought to bear. American naval assets carried advanced electronic warfare systems, satellite communications, and precision-guided munitions that could neutralize Venezuelan defensive systems within hours. However, Venezuela's defensive preparations, including Russian-supplied military equipment and potential support from allies like Iran, suggested the conflict could escalate beyond regional boundaries. The propaganda war accompanying military positioning proved equally intense. American officials framed the deployment in terms of protecting American communities from fentanyl-laced cocaine that kills over 100,000 Americans annually. Venezuelan media, meanwhile, portrayed the approaching fleet as evidence of American imperial aggression, mobilizing popular support for resistance against foreign invasion. The financial warfare component of the escalation continued even as military assets moved into position. The seizure of $700 million in Maduro-linked assets represented only the visible portion of a broader financial siege designed to strangle the cartel's economic lifelines. Banking sanctions, cryptocurrency tracking, and asset freezes created what Treasury officials described as an economic noose around the regime's neck. The human dimension of this escalating confrontation became clear through stories of Venezuela Venezuelan families caught between regime repression and international sanctions. Post-election violence had already claimed dozens of lives and led to thousands of arbitrary detentions, with victims reporting systematic torture and sexual violence in detention facilities. The prospect of military conflict threatened to multiply this suffering exponentially. Regional criminal organizations watched these developments with intense interest, recognizing that the destruction of the Cartel of the Suns could create power vacuums they might exploit. Groups like Colombia's ELN and various Mexican cartels had established relationships with Venezuelan networks that military action could disrupt, potentially triggering broader criminal conflicts across Latin America. Intelligence assessments suggested that Maduro's regime retained significant defensive capabilities despite years of economic sanctions. The mobilization of 4.5 million militia members, while potentially inflated for propaganda purposes, represented a substantial irregular warfare capability. Urban guerrilla tactics in Venezuelan cities could make any ground invasion extremely costly in both military and civilian terms. The psychological warfare component of the confrontation proved equally sophisticated. American officials carefully calibrated their rhetoric to maximize pressure while avoiding explicit threats of invasion that might trigger broader international opposition. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's characterization of Maduro as the head of a cartel rather than as Venezuela's president exemplified this careful messaging strategy. Venezuelan responses revealed the regime's awareness of its vulnerability. The temporary drone ban and enhanced border security measures suggested fears of assassination attempts or special operations raids designed to decapitate the leadership. Intelligence sources indicated preparations for potential government evacuation to allied countries like Russia or Iran. The role of Venezuelan civil society in this escalating confrontation remained complex and dangerous. Opposition leaders like Maria Corina Machado had gone into hiding following post-election repression, while civil society organizations faced systematic persecution. The prospect of military action created additional risks for civilians caught between competing forces. International efforts to de-escalate the crisis through diplomatic channels faced significant obstacles. Regional organizations like the Organization of American States remained divided between countries supporting American action and those opposing military intervention. The United Nations Security Council's paralysis, due to Russian and Chinese opposition to any action against Venezuela, left few multilateral options for conflict resolution. The economic implications of prolonged military confrontation extended far beyond immediate defense expenditures. Venezuela's position as a major oil producer meant that conflict could disrupt global energy markets, particularly affecting countries dependent on Venezuelan crude oil. As August 2025 drew to a close, the world watched a dangerous game of brinkmanship unfold in the Caribbean. American warships maintained their positions in international waters, conducting what officials described as counter-narcotics patrols while demonstrating strike capabilities. Venezuelan forces remained on high alert, prepared for what they characterized as an imminent invasion attempt. The ultimate resolution of this confrontation remained uncertain, as both sides appeared committed to their positions. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.